Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. Before we go into the headlines, a big development this week. It was a big day for the UPA government on Friday as the Prime Minister chaired 3 back-to-back meetings on various pending reform decisions. After months of dragging its feet on key reforms, the government announced a slew of reforms to breathe new life into the sagging economy. In a day that saw the Prime Minister junk the claims of policy paralysis, the government gave the go-ahead for the politically risky 51% FDI in multi-brand retail, 49% investment by foreign airlines in the aviation sector, and the sale of equity in 4 PSUs. The decisions come on top of Thursday's diesel hike and the capping of supply of subsidized LPG to cut oil subsidies. The cabinet also diluted local sourcing norms for 100% foreign direct investment in single brand retail by dropping the provision of 30% compulsory sourcing from small and medium enterprises. For multi-brand retailing, a minimum investment of $100 million has been fixed, half of which necessarily has to be in creating storage and warehousing facilities in rural areas. Permission now has also been granted to foreign airlines to invest under the government approval route in Indian carriers operating scheduled and non-scheduled transport services. The companies which will divest the equities are Hindustan Copper, which will divest 9.59%, NALCO 12.15%, Oil India Limited 10%, and MMTC 9%. The sale of shares is likely to fetch about 15,000 crore, half of the budgetary disinvestment target set for the current fiscal year. So all in all, a fitting reply to the critics who have targeted the government and the Prime Minister in particular on the perceived inertia on reforms. The decisions are sure to be politically unpopular, but by pressing the accelerator on the reform pedal, the Prime Minister seems to have proved to his detractors that despite immense pressure and criticism, this government is capable of taking tough, unpopular decisions that are needed to correct the fiscal and economic situation of the country. And let's take a look at this week's top headlines right away. The government finally bites the bullet on diesel, hikes the price of diesel by 5 rupees, subsidized LPG capped to 6 a year per household. July IIP numbers are out, a marginal growth of 0.1%. Economists worry about the growth trajectory falling. The Food Minister speaks to RSTV on the FCRA bill. That's the Policy Watch exclusive. ICICI Bank and HDFC Bank follow the State Bank of India revise their fixed deposit rates by up to 0.5%. Those were the headlines. And to talk about our top story, Himangshu Watts, Energy and Infra editor at the Economic Times, joins us once again on Policy Watch. Thank you so much, Himangshu, for being with us. We'll go straight into our first story. Now, biting the bullet on subsidies, the government has hiked the price of diesel by a steep 5 rupees per litre. Diesel will now cost at 46.32 per litre in Delhi and 51.25 in Mumbai. The prices of petrol, LPG and PDS kerosene have been left unchanged, but the sale of subsidized LPG cylinders have been restricted to 6 a year for each household. The government has also reduced the excise duty on petrol by 5 rupees 30 paisa per litre to offset the loss from not hiking petrol prices at this time. Currently, these tough measures were taken at a meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs headed by the Prime Minister himself. With diesel prices being hiked after almost a year, the government has once again given fuel to the speculations on diesel deregulation, which has been long a thorny issue for the government. Now, Himangshu, finally the government bites the bullet. Economists and advisors to the ministries had been clamoring for a diesel hike, saying that this is the only way you can actually do something about the fiscal deficit. First thoughts on the diesel hike?
See, as many people have said, it was long overdue. For 14 months, the government could not do anything. It has all kinds of political pressures. And at times, a genuine concern, okay, can we, protect the common man from inflation? and the cascading effect of diesel price. But it was really long, long overdue. It delayed it so long that you had to finally do it in a huge quantum of 5 rupees.
And that's all the criticism that's coming the government's way. Yashwant Sinha, the leader of the BJP, said if the hike came in phases or smaller hikes, over a period of time, it would have been better. But this hike, do you think a 5 rupee hike is going to put a lot of pressure on the common man?
Well, perceptionally, yes. But, even if it had been done in stages, 50 paisa at a time, 10 paisa, 1 rupee, common man would still be paying as much for diesel as he is going to pay today. So, in effect, it won't make a difference, but perceptionally, in terms of, not being shocked, it would have certainly been.
You don't really agree with the criticism that even if it was a phased out hike, or if it's a one steep hike right now, the result is going to be the same.
Yeah, result is going to be the same, but, I do have a question to these political parties who make diesel the number one issue, on the grounds that it affects the common man in all kinds of ways. But I see no protest when vegetable prices go up and, so many other essential commodities. There's a huge section of the Indian population who has no access to diesel, who have a very localized, non-monetized economy also, but they eat vegetables, they drink milk. So, I'm a bit surprised that there's no concern for that. And, this over the years has emerged as, one whipping boy for whichever is the ruling party.
It's a political hot potato, we all know that. So, what you're trying to say is when milk goes up and vegetables goes up, nobody cries foul, but every time the government takes a hard decision, whatever government it might be, people start pointing fingers, wagging tongues.
Vegetables, for example, have been rising at an annual rate of 40%, 50%, 30%. And diesel has gone up by 12%. Even if that entire increase is loaded on vegetables, it's still a 10% hike. So there's a noise about that, but there's no noise about, the more essential commodities.
Himangshu, another concern that we've been hearing ever since the government hiked the price of diesel is that near-term inflation is going to be badly affected by it. And even the RBI has come out with statements saying that even Mr. Rangarajan, the PMEAC, the primary economic advisor to the Prime Minister, has said that this might drive near-term inflation. What is your assessment of the situation?
Yeah, to an extent it certainly would, because diesel itself is a component of the inflation basket, the price index basket. And then its cascading effect on transportation, it would have an impact. So there are various estimates from, 0.2 percentage points or maybe adding everything together, 0.5 percentage points. A related factor is the inflationary expectations. And those, I think, have been contained to some extent. So it won't be all that bad. And it's the real question is, what are the alternatives government had? If you keep it low, finally India is importing the crude oil and it's the people of India who are paying through it. Now, if you don't pay through the diesel price, where the actual users will pay, then finally it has fiscal implications. It leads to all kinds of inefficiencies, fiscal instability. If you don't do all that and your credit rating goes down, your rupee might fall so much that, again, that will further escalate the rupee costs.
And Dr. Rangarajan has clearly said that India doesn't want a sovereign credit rating to fall down, and this was the best steps that we could take right now. Do you think this will, in fact, help, like Mr. Rangarajan says, like Dr. Rangarajan says, that our sovereign rating would be safe for a while because this will help cutting the deficit?
Yeah, certainly. And, if I can extrapolate that argument, now if you do a few good fiscally good things, like raising diesel prices and maybe a few reform or market-oriented measures, and if that leads to a higher confidence in the Indian economy and the Indian markets, there will be a lot of funds flowing in and rupee can actually appreciate. And therefore, the rupee cost of fuel will come down. So maybe by increasing diesel prices, you planted, sown the seeds of a lower price later on by the rupee.
Maybe this one step could perhaps go a long way in improving the situation in the
country.
Certainly.
As long as you're getting the economy right, you get the rupee right, and if there's more growth, so then the affordability of people will increase, the strength of the rupee increases, and if you don't, you're getting into all kinds of.
I want to talk about the RBI and the monetary policy and what effect it will have on that. But before I go there, I want to talk about the allies of the government and the reactions, the political reactions coming in from all quarters, be it the opposition, be it the allies. I was reading somewhere a very interesting blog, and the headline was "Bold move, but please don't roll back." Do you think there is going to be a rollback, given the pressure by the key ally, like the Trinamool, like the DMK and other allies as well?
Well, there's going to be a pressure, and politically, anybody who's in politics cannot, sit quiet after diesel prices have been increased. So, but last time when petrol prices were increased, I remember Mamata Banerjee had all kinds of angry things to say, but after a day, there was silence from her part. The other opposition parties, CPI and CPM, they of course have got ideological issues and they'll probably continue their protest. So the government would be under pressure, but there's a good chance that if with a series of reform-oriented or economic discipline-oriented moves, if you can change the mood, finally, government will have something to write home about.
Let's talk about the RBI for a bit. RBI has made it clear over the past few months that they will not touch monetary rates, they will not touch interest rates unless two things happen. One, the government cuts its fiscal deficit by a large way. Two, inflation comes down.
Yep.
Now, if this is the right step towards cutting the fiscal deficit, this is, of course, one of the big steps that the government needed to take. We also expect near-term inflation to rise, but isn't that a bit of a catch-22? RBI won't touch rates till inflation comes down, but this will drive inflation in the near term. What is going to happen on that front?
See, catch-22 is already a step forward. Earlier, there was no chance.
Okay.
Now it has room to think. Can we do this or can we not? So, even if RBI doesn't do it now, but there's a very good chance it will have the confidence to do it later.
So you don't think the next meeting that's going to happen on Monday, I think, this Monday, RBI is not going to touch interest rates. They're going to wait and watch again.
I won't rule out, because there's enormous pressure to cut the interest rates. If you see the trends around the world, the Western countries, neighboring countries, China. So there has been easing of monetary policy. There have been stimulus measures all over. And India has stood out as an exception. So, they might make a token move. But, that already, the fact that we can discuss this, that they might do that. Till this was done, there was no chance.
Right. So perhaps even this is a small step forward.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the increasingly changed perspective or opinion of the government now. Till perhaps last week or a couple of weeks ago, the government was bombarded with policy paralysis and ineffective government and lame duck government, and they're not doing anything to do anything. Over the past week, there have been murmurs, there's been a slight change in how the government functions, or how they give out signals, even the finance ministry or the PMO, for example. Now, this is the first big decision that they've taken we've been talking about for a very long time. We also understand there is a cabinet meeting scheduled, which will discuss this investment in PSU, which will also discuss approving FDI in retail as well as aviation. Do you think the mood has changed completely in the Manmohan Singh-led UPA too? Do you think the government now is ready to take those hard decisions and prove that it can take difficult decisions when push comes to shove?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there's been a build-up to this, from the time the ruling party, the coalition government, decided to appoint Mr. Chidambaram as the finance minister. This man has a track record. Even when he was in a different government supported by the CPM. He came out with a budget. Which was a dream budget. And just as an aside, I'll share with you something. I once interviewed Jyoti Basu on his last day as chief minister. And I asked him about this budget. He was talking about pro-people policy and liberalization. I said, how come you supported that? And he says, but this man doesn't listen. He's so determined to do it.
So if a leader like Jyoti Basu, of course, that means a lot. So agreed. Mr. Chidambaram has a reputation. Yeah. He's known as a man who's a hard-working man. He has a no-nonsense attitude and does push his policies through. But where does that leave us with other reforms then? Diesel hike has happened.
Yeah.
Montek Singh Ahluwalia today came out with a statement, said that this is a positive step, but this is not the complete step. We need complete deregulation. Petrol hasn't been touched. Do you see that happening?
Complete deregulation?
In the sense that petrol also has to be hiked.
See, what they've done is, and that's a very important thing they have done, which has escaped a lot of the discussion. They have announced that they will reduce the excise duty on petrol to the extent that it is priced lower than international rates. And the 5 rupee hike in diesel, which is pre-VAT hike actually, so in Delhi it comes to nearly 6 rupees. That includes 1 rupee 50 paisa increase in the excise duty. So what you're doing is you are shifting. You've cut excise in petrol and you've increased it here. Petrol is a very small component of India's fuel demand. Diesel is a very huge component. Now, because of the growing
diesel is about 12%, I think.
No, petrol might be 10-12%. Diesel would be more than 40%. Yeah. So, because of the frozen diesel price and rising petrol price, it had skewed the entire automotive market. So, the moment a person switches from the old petrol car to a new diesel car, he's paying much lesser taxes on the fuel. So now with this change, even if you switch, it won't hit the government revenue.
Right.
It'll probably increase.
Two small questions before we wrap up this particular segment. One, the auto sector is quite happy with this. They've been wanting this for a very long time. Also, OMCs have recently, ever since the diesel hike was announced, they've gained in the markets as well. How is it going to affect OMCs and the auto industry?
See, for the auto industry, the big fear was, there were noises, some statements from cabinet ministers that we should increase the excise duty on diesel cars. And the automotive industry had a fair and a logical point that, don't have this kind of a taxation system on the vehicle, have it on the fuel. If you think diesel is too cheap, discourage it by increasing diesel prices and not by the excise duty on this. So to that extent, they are happy.
And OMCs, of course.
OMCs, you talk to them, talk to a chairman, he says anything, it's such a relief.
Right,
because they are really, they've been in trouble. They've got some incredible tens of thousands of crores of borrowings. Their own credit rating was at risk.
So bold move right now. We'll have to see if there's a rollback or not. I'm sure a lot of people are praying that there is no rollback, but bold move nonetheless. Thank you, Himangshu Watts, for joining us on Policy Watch this week. We hope you come back again. That was Himangshu Watts, Energy and Infra Editor of the Economic Times, talking to us on Policy Watch. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching Policy Watch. The exclusive interview with the Food Minister, KV Thomas, is up next. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Now, the government is keen on the FCRA bill, which aims to give more powers to the Forward Markets Commission. The Forward Markets Commission is responsible for regulating and promoting futures, that is, forward trade in commodities. According to the latest FMC data, trade in forward markets increased 20% in the January-March period of 2012 against the corresponding period last year, even when the overall economic scenario remained sluggish. Policy Watch gets you an exclusive chat with Food Minister KV Thomas. He's also the Consumer Affairs Minister on the future of the FCRA bill and the evolving road of the Forward Markets Commission. Take a look.
Traders in the futures market are eagerly waiting for some forward movement in the Forward Contracts Regulation Amendment Bill. And to talk more on this, I have with me the man himself, Mr. KV Thomas, Minister of Food and Consumer Affairs. Welcome to Policy Watch, sir. So recently, the Cabinet has deferred a decision on the FCRA bill. What do you think is the reason for this, and what is the future of the bill now?
See, this bill was introduced in 2010 in the Parliament, Lok Sabha. Then it was sent to the Standing Committee. Standing Committee had discussed with all the stakeholders, and their recommendations have come to us. Then with their recommendations, we sent again the bill to the Cabinet. Approval was there for the approval. Now we are waiting for the approval. I don't know the specific reasons because that is never discussed in the Cabinet. It came and it has been deferred. I think some point of time this will be discussed in the Cabinet and decisions will be taken.
So left parties have opposed the bill. So what are their fears and what is their rationale behind opposing this bill?
Exactly, I don't know what is their position, because whatever doubts they have raised on the FCRA bill has been cleared, both by our department as well as with the Standing Committee. And in the Standing Committee, there is representatives of all the stakeholders, all the representatives of political party, MPs from different political parties are there, and it has been discussed there. So I don't know specifically what is the problem, unless it comes to the Cabinet and points are being raised. But when it circulated and came back to us, there was not much opposition on that.
So how will this bill benefit the Forward Markets Commission, and will it give a clear-cut role to the FMC?
See, by this amendment, FMC as a regulatory body will get much more teeth. Government does not want to interfere in the everyday affair of the FMC. government can give directions. So with this amendment, the FMC chairman and the body will have more powers. Second is, FMC will stand on its own leg. The regulatory body will have its own resources. And another more important is, especially the small and medium farmers will get a much better benefit because all the activities will become much more transparent. This is what government intend with this amendment.
How valid is the argument that speculative trading in commodity markets will lead to inflationary pressures, high inflationary pressures?
These are the arguments there for a quite long time. But one is future trade is going on all over the world. And future trade is there for a quite long time. I am coming from Cochin, Kerala, where my father and grandfather were involved in the future trade of coconut oil. We call it Avati Vyaparam. And I first to China about a year back. One of the best exchanges are in China. But there are doubts whether these speculations are the reasons for inflation. But with experience, some of the items like wheat, say for example, wheat now it is not under the future trade. Even there is a price fluctuation. So basically it depends on the demand and supply position. This is what I feel. Because even in physical trade, some of the items when we allowed on a physical trade, there is always a fluctuation. So you cannot completely blame on the future trade when there are inflation. But we have to be cautious. And that is why we say the FMC, the regulatory authority, should have much more teeth and powers. FMC should not be controlled from Delhi. It should be an independent authority.
Thank you so much, sir, for talking to Rajya Sabha Television. That was Mr. K.V. Thomas, and he clearly said that the government does not want to interfere in the day-to-day affairs of the FMC and wants to give power to the FMC. And that's all I have for now. Back to you in the studio.
That was Rahul Kapoor talking to K.V. Thomas, the food minister. We'll take a small break right now. We'll come back with the third story on the other side of this break. Back to Policy Watch now. India's industrial output grew by 0.1% in July from a year earlier as manufacturing declined for a second straight month, increasing concern about an economic slowdown and adding pressure to the RBI to ease monetary policy. We file a story. Take a look. India's industrial output grew by a marginal 0.1% in July from a year earlier, reversing June's 1.8% contraction. A recovery in consumer non-durable sector helped the IIP growth in July. However, manufacturing, which accounts for over 75% of industrial production, contracted for the second straight month. According to data released by the government, the growth rates in July 2012 over July 2011 are 1.5% in basic goods, 1.4% in consumer durables, 0.1% in consumer non-durables, with the overall growth in consumer goods being 0.7%.
I think this very small, tiny movements from one quarter to the next or 1 month to the next, one should not give too much weight to it. Yes, it does indicate things are not getting too bad or not getting worse. Maybe it's turning around, but that's perhaps just wishful thinking.
The latest economic report offers little respite for the government. With the economic slowdown beginning to bite India's middle class, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh faces the uphill task of reviving the economy before his government faces the polls in a series of state elections starting this year and leading up to a general election in 2014. With Rahul Kapoor, Athar Khan, RSTV. There you go. Marginal increase in IIP in July. Of course, economists and advisors in the finance ministry had advised that growth would pick up in this particular period. It really hasn't happened, and it's surprising to a lot of people as well. In fact, a marginal growth of 0.1% is worrying because people and economists in particular, both international and domestic, have kept saying that India's growth trajectory might not be the same that we enjoyed and experienced in the boom years of the 2000s, that decade as well. So IIP, of course, a worrying figure. The biggest worry, in my opinion, of course, is the manufacturing sector, the shining star of the Indian economy not doing so well. The manufacturing sector is in trouble, and that's something the government has to take a look at. Our first story this week on Policy Watch was the fuel hike, the diesel hike, I beg your pardon, by the government. ₹5 is the hike that the hike has been done in New Delhi and Bombay now, as well as other parts of the country. Opposition said that this should have come in a phased manner. It hasn't happened. Of course, my guest seems to think that whether it was a phased hike or it was a one-time hike, the steep hike, it didn't really make much of a difference. But a bold move by the government, extremely required right now, and will help in cutting the fiscal deficit. We'll have to see whether or not a rollback is possible or not. Allies not happy about this particular hike. Our second story, of course, on the FCRA bill. KV Thomas, the food minister, seems to think the road ahead is positive, even though the left parties, particularly the CPI and the CPM, do oppose it, but it will help the Forward Markets Commission and will ease forward trading of commodities. Our third story this week on Policy Watch, marginal IIP. Like I said before, economists worried about the 0.1% marginal growth in IIP numbers, industrial production, the biggest worry, of course, being the manufacturing sector. That's all we have on Policy Watch this week. Till next week, Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thanks for watching.